Hello everyone, it's Douglas here and welcome to my home on Cellardyke shore overlooking the Isle of May for the third episode of my new Dream to Dram vlog in which I'll be sharing with you some of my favourite places in Scotland, one dram at a time. For today's episode, I'm going to be taking you along the Fife coastal path from Cellardyke to Caiplie Coves with my dog Barclay. Below us, we've got Cellardyke Tidal Pool, which I covered in my last episode. We've also got East Neuk Outdoors. Then on the upper level, we've got Silverdykes Caravan Park, and the lower level, Kilrenny Mill Caravan Park, Coastal Escapes and Beach. The land below us is owned by the Peddies of Corn Series Farm, and this was actually going to be the site in the 1930s of a golf course designed by local legendary architect James Braid from Ely. Sadly, this project never got off the ground due to money constraints, but instead the locals built Cellardyke Tidal Pool. Now, the historical importance of our next point of interest is barely known by anyone. However, this wall, Willie Gray's Dyke, was actually the source of a key moment in Scottish history, the Porteous Riots. How so? Well, let me tell you the tale. In 1736, Andrew Wilson, a local baker and smuggler, ran ashore a large consignment of illicit brandy right here at the foot of Willie Gray's Dyke before transporting it on to Cellardyke and then, under cover of darkness, to the Smuggler's Hoff, a local tavern in the high street of Anstruther. Unfortunately, local exciseman John Stark from Kirkcaldy and his customs officers were lying in wait for him at the tavern and confiscated all of his brandy. Now, this wasn't the first time that Stark had seized goods from Wilson, so Wilson had had enough and decided to get even by robbing Stark a few days later of the money he had made from the sale of the brandy in Pittenweem. Stark escaped though by hiding in a haystack and regrouped to capture Wilson the next day in Anstruther with all the stolen money. Arrested, Wilson and his cohorts were taken to Edinburgh, where they were sentenced to death. After Wilson's execution on the grass market in Edinburgh, a number of boys threw some garbage at the executioner, a common practice at the time. A Captain Porteous, who may well have been drunk, lost his head completely and ordered his men to open fire, killing 4 and wounding 11, 9 of them so seriously that they died by the time Captain Porteous came to trial. Porteous was found guilty at his trial and sentenced to be hanged, but because he played golf with some high-up people of rank and consequence, an application was made for a respite to the Crown. This was granted and his hanging was postponed by 6 weeks. The people of Edinburgh suspected that this was merely the prelude to the granting of a free pardon, and so took matters into their own hands. Joined by landed gentlemen from Fife, Stirling, Perth and even Dumfries, they descended upon Edinburgh. The mob marched to the toll booth and burnt down Porteous' cell door before hanging him from a dyer's pole on the grass market. The authorities were rightly furious and offered a £200 reward to anyone who could identify the ringleaders, but they were met with a wall of silence and no one from the mob was ever brought to justice. Meanwhile, back in the East Neuk of Fife, smuggling carried on merrily, and our final destination, Caiplie Coves, after we pass over the Highland Coos by the Sea Clan, is widely believed to have been a popular hiding place for smugglers' contraband. Caiplie Coves comprise of a group of sandstone caves which contain inscribed crosses of varying sizes and two picture symbols on the walls. Legend has it that in the 9th century, the caves were used by Irish missionary St Adrian or Ephraim for a time before he set up a monastery on the Isle of May. In 1875 AD, invading Danes ransacked the monastery though, and St Ephraim and all his followers were murdered. Thereafter, both the Isle of May and Caiplie were likely to have become important sites of pilgrimage alongside St Andrews. Over the centuries, the caves would have also been used by farmers to house their livestock, and also as a ducat or dovecot, the does being the doves, which would have been farmed both with their meat and their eggs as a source of food. In 2019, the Coves became recognised in international literary circles thanks to Karen Soley, one of Canada's leading poets, who wrote her 5th book of poetry about them, entitled The Caiplie Caves. Shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize, she imagines Ephraim living in the caves, contemplating whether he should remain in them in solitude as a caved hermit, or whether he should sail to the Isle of May and build a communal place of worship, a priory. In the end, he remains, spending his days watching the birds and seeing visions of St. Paul. The cave we're approaching now I've always known as Jimmy Gilligan's cave, because he lived here as a hermit in the first half of the 20th century. His tale is wonderfully described in the Sunday Post in 1915 as follows. Jimmy Gilligan is an Aberdeen man. When he was young, the life of a soldier appealed to him, and he threw in his lot with the old 92nd, the Gordon Highlanders. He served for 3 years in Afghanistan, and then in the Boer War in the 1st Majuba, when he was wounded in the head, the mark of which he still bears to this day, as well as in the legs. His footsteps led him to Fife. He had no plans, but as he trudged along the seafront, the waves as they dashed themselves against the rocks took hold upon him. It was the beginning of winter, and the sea was in its most entrancing mood. The wanderer was footsore and weary. He wished to rest, and it seemed as if nature had answered the unspoken prayer of the homeless man and provided him with a shelter for his head. The sight of Caiplie Coves brought joy to the heart of Jimmy Gilligan. Here he could find rest, for a time at least, but never for a moment did he imagine that the deep, dark cave in the heart of the huge rock would provide him with the home for the next 6 years, and he fervently believes for many more years to come. But while providing a cover for his head, the cave was by no means an ideal habitation. Damp and dark and open to the cold wintry blasts from the North Sea, with angry waters at high tide dashing practically to the mouth of his cave, there was little comfort to be found. By degrees, he added to the comforts of his new quarters. By an ingenious device, he fitted up a stove to the interior of his cave, and he quickly overcame the smoke difficulty by gathering sufficient piping to make an ideal chimney, which he carried through an aperture above the doorway. Flooring from the wood he gathered on the foreshore kept him off the damp ground, and as the winter months passed and he had procured a bed, a table, several chairs, it occurred to him that he might do worse than take up permanent residence here. The cave dweller of Crail is a great favourite with visitors, and he enjoys their visits to the full and is delighted to show his home to all callers. A farmer close by is very good to the hermit, and Jimmy is often to be found there. He used to spend his winter evenings among the men employed on the farm, returning to his cave in the darkness. He always carried a lantern with him on these occasions, as the road is a very dangerous one. But these happy evenings are now a thing of the past. A light at night, now the war has started on the Fifeshire coast, is an offence, and Jimmy is forced to remain indoors after dark. This means a long, lonely night for the old man, but he finds much comfort and pleasure in his books. It seems that Jimmy toughed it out living in the caves until the outbreak of World War II, when he simply disappears from the Fife coast. Some speculated that he was a German spy, but I think this is highly unlikely, for he soon turns up in a Leith hospital and dies in the early 1940s homeless. His last address, the Salvation Army, 1 The Pleasance, Edinburgh.